I didn't know I could bleed so quietly until the night the city learned my name. Before that night, I had made a habit of vanishing while standing in plain sight. I clocked in before dawn when the sky was the color of old dishwater, and left after midnight when the streetlights hummed like tired bees. The Moretti estate was a world that opened its mouth and swallowed the unimportant. I obliged it. I ironed napkins until they creased like pressed leaves. I polished wine glasses until my reflection was a smudge that refused to become a face. It suited me. Invisibility doesn't argue. It gets you through the door, past the men with clipped voices, past the rooms where decisions were made over quiet music and colder liquor. My name was a thing I folded and hid in the pocket of my uniform and only took out on the bus ride home, where nobody asked me for it anyway. I rented a thin-walled apartment, 2 trains, and a bus from the front gates. My sister's inhaler lived on the nightstand like a small blue lighthouse. Some nights she breathed like the air had hands. I learned to count our money and our pills with the same concentration, 2 piles that shrank in rhythm. I made lists in a narrow notebook: rent, groceries, a number for an insurance agent who never answered, the cheapest pharmacy still open after 10. On the back page I wrote recipes for comfort I could not afford. I taught myself to walk a little faster when I was alone, to listen for footsteps that didn't belong to me, to carry my keys between my fingers when the street forgot how to be kind. At the estate, I learned the choreography of silence. The head of security, Franco, had a way of crossing rooms that erased them. He moved, and the air reset. He drank his espresso without checking the temperature. He didn't laugh. He didn't need to. The kitchen staff watched the doorway when he passed as if a tide were moving through the house. I watched too. I watched everything. There's a particular hush that follows power, and I used it like cover. I turned knives so their edges faced away. I lined up the silver until the spoons glowed like small moons. I memorized the exact distance between a plate and the table's edge. The radio near the walk-in cooler betrayed us sometimes with a burst of bright music, and we all glanced at the door to be sure the wrong ears hadn't come to listen. We were a guild of quiet. He rarely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with the economy of a person who kept spare words for emergencies. Giovanni Moretti had a voice that found the exact size of a room and filled it without crowding anyone. I kept my eyes down, not out of fear only, but because facing him felt like stepping into bright weather from a basement. He smelled faintly of cedar and a sweetness that wasn't cologne. He didn't fidget. When he used his phone, his face stayed the same. When he was angry, the room adjusted itself. A lamp seemed to dim. A clock seemed to forget to tick. The house took instructions from his breath. I became good at being furniture he approved of. Useful, unspeaking, polished to a gloss. There were small mercies. The baker sent home day-old bread. The driver with the crooked cap let me sit where the heater worked. The dishwasher shared cigarette breaks he wasn't allowed to take with anyone else. We didn't discuss politics or saints. We discussed rain. New York has more than one kind. There's the kind that talks too much. The kind that hurts. The kind that forgives you after a long day if you stand under it a while and let it decide that you've learned enough. On rain days, the city was a little softer at the edges. On rain nights, the alleyways pitched their voices lower, and you could almost mistake danger for mischief if you weren't paying attention. That afternoon, the front hall smelled like wet stones. A delivery came late. The men who signed for it wrote their names like they were carving the letters into someone's back. I passed through with my cart. A bulb flickered, and in the stutter of light I saw Franco's face tilt toward the window, listening to something only men like him hear. Not thunder, not a car, but the change a city makes when someone important tells it to hold still. I kept going. I learned a long time ago that you don't ask questions if you also want to leave a room. I stayed an extra hour to finish the glassware, because my sister's cough had been worse, and the pharmacy kept the good syrup behind the counter for people who could meet a gaze and a price. I told myself I would buy it if the rain stopped. I told myself many conditional sentences that needed miracles to be true. When I finally hung my apron, the building had settled into its nighttime posture. The windows wore their reflections like masks. The chandeliers had been dimmed to something that felt like a secret. My shoes made an honest sound against the stone. Out by the service exit, the world was rinsed in silver. The lamp above the door flickered like a pulse that refused to settle. I pulled my hood tight, tucked my chin, and let the rain find the old bruise in my ribs from a clumsy fall last winter. I thought about soup. I thought about our landlord's smile that never included his eyes. I thought about staying late again tomorrow because overtime pays in slow, honest inches, and we were always a foot short. I checked my phone, saw no messages, and slid it into the right pocket because the left had a hole that swallowed things I wanted to keep. The shortcut to the bus stop was a narrow throat of brick between the deli and the laundromat. It cut 3 minutes off my walk if I didn't mind the smell of old cabbage and new bleach. I had used it so many times it felt like a hallway in a house I could never afford. The rain had a different voice in there, more urgent, like it wanted to tell you something before it slipped off the ledge. I stepped in, counting the crates with my eyes like a private ritual for luck. 1, 2, 3, skip, and then the slick of a puddle that looked shallow and wasn't. A bottle rolled somewhere ahead, glass against concrete. A sound that was almost a coin flipped to decide a life. I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because my body knew better than my thoughts. The alley held its breath. My breath tried to run and couldn't. I reached for my phone in the right pocket and touched the hard rectangle like an answer sheet I wasn't allowed to turn over yet. I told myself to keep walking. My hands disagreed and stayed very still. "Evening," a man said, voice warm and wrong. "You work up at the big house, don't you?" I have lied for rent, for medicine, for mercy. I couldn't find a useful lie now. My mouth made a shape it couldn't fill. I took one step, deliberate, like I was measuring the ground to sell it later. Another voice came from the other side, quieter, patient, the shape of a door closing softly. "Don't be shy." I thought of my sister's inhaler and the way it rattled when the canister was almost empty. I thought of a headline about a girl no one listened to until it was too late. I thought of the way Giovanni's people moved around him, precise as a clock made by a man who believed time was a weapon. I said finally, "I don't know what you mean." The first one laughed. The second one didn't. The laugh slid down the wall and pooled near my feet. I stared at the puddle and saw no sky. The quiet man said, "Tell your boss we said hello." The words were courteous, like a napkin folded just so. I didn't answer. I considered running. Running is honest work. But the exit was narrow, and my shoes had never been good at bravado. I walked. A hand found my sleeve and clamped down with a familiarity that made me want to tear my skin off and live without it. The fabric bit into my arm. The rain watched, faithful and indifferent. "Slow down," the friendly one murmured. "It is a particular humiliation to discover your voice working for you when your legs won't." "Let me go," I said. "Not yet," the quiet one replied. "We need you to carry a message." Quote, "I don't carry messages," I said, and it was almost true. I swallowed. I forced myself to meet the dark where his face should be. "They don't even know I exist." The friendly man's laugh stopped being friendly. The quiet one finally stepped closer. His breath didn't smell like anything at all. "After tonight," he said, like an oath he enjoyed, "they will." The rain threaded my hair into ropes. My heart decided to hammer its way up and out. I thought of silverware polished so clean it could hold a reflection. I thought of a voice that could fill a room without raising itself. I thought of survival, the dull kind that no one wants to hear about because it has no good story attached. My phone was still in my hand, solid, useless. The alley narrowed. The city forgot me the way I had asked it to, for so long. "Please," I said finally, to no one in particular, and to whatever mercy keeps count at this hour. "Don't worry," the quiet man said, almost kind. "He'll come." He moved then. The dark moved with him. And I learned how softly a person can bleed. When I woke, the light hurt. It wasn't sunlight, it was too clean, too deliberate. The ceiling above me was high and white, the kind of white that doesn't forgive dirt. A faint hum of air conditioning hid beneath the sound of rain. I tried to sit up, and the motion made every part of my body protest like it had been borrowed and returned in pieces. There was a voice near my ear, calm, professional. "Don't move, miss." Fingers, careful and cool, adjusted the blanket. A woman in a white coat leaned over me, checked my pulse, my eyes, the bruises along my arms. "You're safe," she said. The words felt too big for my skin. Safe. The word belonged somewhere else. When the door opened, the temperature of the room changed. I didn't have to see him to know it was him. Giovanni Moretti carried silence like a scent. It moved before him, heavy and precise. I turned my head slowly. He stood in the doorway, still in the rain-dark suit from the night before. His eyes didn't blink. "Who did this?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it filled the space, the way a tide fills a shore. Inevitable, steady, cold. I swallowed. I don't know their names." He stepped closer, one slow movement at a time, until the shadows from the window climbed up his shoulders. "Describe them." "Two men," I whispered. "They waited. They said to tell you hello." Something unreadable flickered across his face. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't anger either. It was calculation, the slow, dangerous kind. He turned toward Franco, who stood just behind him like an outline cut from stone. Find them, Giovanni said. Find out who sent them. Franco nodded once and left the room. The door shut quietly behind him. The doctor handed me a glass of water. My hands shook, spilling half of it. Giovanni watched, then took the glass, placed it on the table and said, "You'll stay here until this is resolved." "I have a sister," I said. My voice cracked. "She needs me home. She'll be looked after." "How?" "She will be," he repeated, each word like a step taken on marble. There was nothing left to argue. I sank back into the pillows, dizzy with exhaustion and something sharper, shame maybe, for being seen so broken. He didn't leave. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain pressed against the windows in small, persistent hands. Finally he said, "They knew where to find you. That doesn't happen by accident. I didn't tell anyone where I worked." "No," he agreed, "but someone did." The way he said it made me shiver. The doctor cleared her throat. "She needs rest, Mr. Moretti." He didn't answer her. He looked at me instead, as though trying to decide what I was, a victim, a liability, or a debt he hadn't agreed to pay. When he finally turned toward the door, he said quietly, "If anyone asks who hurt you, tell them no one. From now on, no one touches you without my permission." The door closed. His footsteps faded into the hall. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the tears wouldn't come. I sat there, counting the seconds between thunder and lightning. Somewhere beyond these walls, a phone was ringing, and somewhere a man was already being told to disappear. By the time I could stand, the room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. I moved to the window. The garden below was soaked silver, the gravel path shining like glass. Men in dark coats moved between the cars, their gestures clipped, efficient. I saw Franco's silhouette near the gate, speaking into a radio. The doctor returned with a tray. Soup, bread, a small bottle of painkillers. She smiled without warmth. "Eat something," she said. "It will help." I managed a few sips. My body felt both foreign and heavy. She checked my bandages again and left. The room fell back into its hush. I walked slowly to the mirror. The girl looking back at me was pale and bruised, but her eyes were still hers, tired, searching, stubborn. I touched my jaw where his thumb had brushed away the dirt, and my chest tightened. I didn't want to owe him anything. Yet here I was, inside his house, breathing air that belonged to his world. Evening came before I noticed. The rain hadn't stopped. The lamps in the hall glowed amber through the half-open door. I heard footsteps again, lighter this time. A tray clicked against the table. I turned. Giovanni stood there, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened. He placed a steaming cup on the table. "Tea," he said, "for the pain. You didn't have to." He cut me off gently. "You shouldn't have been in that alley. It's the only way to the bus." "Not anymore." His gaze held mine until I looked away. "You think this is about me," he said, quieter now. "But it isn't. They hit you because they thought you mattered to me. They wanted to see if I'd notice." "And did you?" He studied me for a long time. I did now. Something in the way he said it made my throat close. He turned to leave, hand on the doorframe. "Rest," he said. "This house keeps its own promises." The door shut behind him, and the room felt too large again. I lay back down, listening to the rain crawl down the glass, wondering what it meant to be protected by a man everyone else feared. That night, I dreamed of footsteps in water, and a voice saying, "He'll come." When I woke, the sound was real, cars starting in the driveway, engines low, certain. I knew then that the hunt had already begun, and that the message they had given me was now being answered in a language I didn't understand. And for the first time in my life, safety felt like the most dangerous thing of all. Morning came like an apology that didn't mean it. The curtains had been drawn back, letting in a light too honest for the room. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a thin fog that clung to the garden outside. I sat up slowly, the soreness in my body reminding me that the night before had been real. Every breath felt like it might break something still trying to heal. The door opened without a knock. A maid entered, young, neat, eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. She carried a tray with breakfast I couldn't imagine eating. "Mr. Moretti said you should eat," she murmured. Her voice didn't ask if I wanted to. It delivered orders dressed as kindness. When she left, I was alone again. The room smelled faintly of lemons and polish, the scent of a place constantly being erased. I traced the edge of the blanket and thought about my sister. I didn't have my phone. I didn't know if he had actually sent anyone to check on her, or if that had been another one of his promises that didn't need to be true. A knock came, softer this time. Franco stepped in, hat in hand. "She's fine," he said before I could ask. "Groceries delivered this morning. The kid next door is keeping an eye out. Did you tell her where I am? He shook his head. Mr. Moretti doesn't like people knowing things they don't need to. Guan. Then, how do I know you're not lying? He smiled without humor. You don't. The door closed, leaving me with silence that felt heavier than company. I looked out at the garden again. Men were posted near the fence. Their coats moved like dark sails in the wind. This wasn't a house. It was a territory. Every window an eye, every corridor a vein, carrying secrets instead of blood. When I tried to leave the room, the handle resisted, locked from the outside. I pressed my forehead to the door, half laughing. So this was safety, a prettier kind of cage. Hours passed. The house made noises that didn't belong to houses, phones ringing, footsteps echoing through marble halls, doors opening and closing at odd intervals. Once, I heard laughter brief, male, quickly swallowed by silence. Somewhere below, a piano note rang and stopped before it could become music. In the afternoon, the maid returned with a change of clothes, soft sweater, loose pants, both in shades that didn't demand attention. You'll have dinner downstairs tonight, she said. Mr. Moretti's request. Does he always make requests like that? He makes requests the way other people breathe. When she left, I changed, moving carefully. The bruises along my ribs had turned the color of storm clouds. My reflection in the mirror looked almost like me, but quieter, as if some part of me had decided not to come back. At dusk, Franco appeared again to escort me. We walked down the long hallway, my bare feet sinking into the thick carpet. The chandelier light fractured on the marble floor. The house was enormous but felt smaller than I remembered, as if its walls leaned in to listen. In the dining room, Giovanni stood near the window, his back to me. He didn't turn when I entered. Sit, he said, and the single syllable felt like a door closing. I sat. The table was set for two, the kind of formality that pretends to be casual. A meal waited, pasta, wine, bread still warm enough to steam. He poured for me, then for himself. I noticed his hands steady, unhurried, the kind that never spilled or trembled. How are you feeling? He asked. Trapped. A corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. That's the point. I didn't ask to be kept here. Quote. And yet, you are alive because of it. He took a sip of wine. You were a target whether you knew it or not. They wanted to send a message. Now the message has been returned. What does that mean? He set his glass down. It means there's balance again. I wanted to ask if balance required blood, but I bit the words back. His gaze moved to my hands, to the faint tremor I couldn't hide. You should eat, he said. You'll need your strength. For what? To heal, he said simply, and to remember where you belong. The phrase struck harder than it should have. Belong. As if this house, this table, this man, had any place for someone like me. I forced myself to eat a few bites. The food tasted expensive and joyless. Across from me, Giovanni ate like it was a ritual, slow and precise. When the plates were cleared, he stood. You'll stay in the West Wing. Franco will make sure you have everything you need. Don't leave the grounds until I say otherwise. Quote. I'm not a prisoner. No, he said. You're under my protection. There's a difference. Feels the same. His eyes softened just enough to unsettle me. Maybe, but one keeps you breathing. He left before I could reply. I sat there alone, the last light of day spilling across the table like liquid gold. Somewhere deep inside the house, a door slammed. I couldn't tell if it was meant for me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moon carved pale shapes across the ceiling. Every sound, the creak of wood, the sigh of wind felt amplified. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall, slow, measured. They stopped outside my door. A pause, then a voice, low and calm. Get some rest, Lauren. It was him. The steps faded. I lay there staring into the dark, heart beating too loud in the quiet. I didn't know if he was checking on me or reminding me that he could. Either way, I finally understood. Safety and danger had learned each other's names here, and I was caught somewhere in between, not knowing which one I'd chosen. I woke to the sound of a knock that was too polite to ignore. Morning had arrived, wrapped in pale light, the kind that couldn't decide if it wanted to be warm or cold. I sat up, smoothing the blanket as if tidiness could make me less nervous. Come in, I said. The door opened, and he stepped inside without hesitation. Giovanni Moretti never asked permission to enter a room. Space rearranged itself around him. He wore a dark shirt, no jacket, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked less like the man who ruled the city and more like someone who'd been awake all night thinking about it. He didn't smile. He rarely did. You're awake, he said. I didn't sleep much. I didn't expect you to. He gestured toward the chair near the window. Sit. We should talk. I obeyed, mostly because I didn't know what would happen if I didn't. He remained standing for a moment, watching me like he was trying to fit my outline into a puzzle he'd already solved. Then he sat across from me, his posture too calm to be casual. Tell me everything, he said. I took a breath. My throat felt tight. I left after my shift around midnight. The rain was heavy. I took the alley between the deli and the laundromat. It's faster. 2 men were waiting. I didn't see their faces clearly. One of them said to tell you hello. His jaw tightened. Did they mention a name? No. Accent? Maybe Eastern European? I'm not sure. They didn't talk much. He nodded slowly, eyes focused somewhere past my shoulder. I could almost hear his mind turning, sorting, deciding who would pay for this. I'm sorry, I said quietly. His eyes snapped back to me. Why are you apologizing? Because this happened because of you. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. No. It happened because someone thought they could reach me through someone harmless. They won't make that mistake again. That sounds like a threat. It's a correction. I looked down at my hands. They were clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. You talk about people's lives like they're debts to be collected. That's exactly what they are. I flinched at the calm certainty in his tone. And me? What am I? For a moment he didn't answer. Then softly, collateral. For now. Quote. The words landed somewhere deep, sharp enough to sting but not enough to draw blood. I didn't ask to be part of this. He studied me. Do you think anyone ever asks? Silence stretched between us. Somewhere outside, a bird dared to sing before falling quiet again. The sound felt wrong here. Giovanni stood. You'll have security when you leave this room. If anyone asks, you work for me now. I don't. You do, he said with finality that ended the discussion. It's the only way to make sure no one touches you again. You're under my protection. That makes you mine to guard. Mine. The word echoed in my head like a slow bell. He walked to the door, then stopped and turned slightly. You think I'm cruel, he said. You're not wrong, but cruelty keeps people alive in my world. Is that what you tell yourself when it costs you someone? His gaze held mine, unreadable. It's what I tell myself when I can still sleep afterward. Grunt. And then he was gone, leaving the door open behind him. I sat there, the morning light slipping across the floor, trying to steady my breath. His presence lingered in the room like smoke. The words "you work for me now" played over and over until they lost their meaning and became something heavier, something binding. Later, when Franco came to check on me, I asked, what happens when Giovanni says someone works for him? Franco adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. It means they stop belonging to themselves. I looked out the window, where the guards stood like dark statues by the gate. And if they try to leave? He smiled faintly, almost kindly. They don't. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. Every hallway felt narrower. Every glance from the staff lingered a little too long. I could feel their curiosity pressing against my back. Who was this girl who made the boss break his own rules? When night came, I found myself back in that chair by the window, staring out at the lights of the city beyond the gates. I wondered if my sister had eaten, if she had opened the grocery bag that had magically appeared at her door. I wondered how long it would take before she realized I wasn't coming home tonight. Or tomorrow. Maybe ever. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed, followed by the sound of his voice, low and measured, giving orders I couldn't hear. I leaned my head against the glass. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold. For a moment, I let myself imagine another life, one where the alley had been empty, where I'd walked home, made soup, watched my sister sleep, and never met a man whose voice could change the air itself. But that life wasn't mine anymore. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear him saying it. You're under my protection now. And I didn't know whether to feel safe or sentenced. The days that followed felt stitched together from someone else's life. Every morning, a knock, a tray, the same routine, the illusion of choice in a world where every move had already been made for me. The bruises along my ribs darkened, then began to fade, leaving behind a soreness that had nothing to do with skin. I was healing, but I didn't feel better. I started walking the halls when I couldn't stand being still. The house was vast, too quiet for its size. It had that soundless hum of expensive places, carpets swallowing footsteps, doors closing like they were trained to. The staff moved with the precision of people who knew exactly when to appear and when to vanish. They greeted me politely, their eyes slipping past mine as if afraid that recognition might be dangerous. Once, I passed 2 of them whispering near the kitchen. They fell silent as soon as I entered. One pretended to straighten a vase that didn't need straightening. The other avoided looking at me at all. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was radioactive. Franco was the only one who spoke to me without fear. He escorted me on short walks through the garden, where the roses grew in perfect lines like obedient soldiers. "He likes order," he said when he caught me staring. "Order or control?" He smiled faintly. "Same thing in this house." In the evenings, Giovanni worked in his office. I passed the door once it was slightly open, just enough to see the back of his head, the way he sat perfectly still while men came and went, leaving pieces of information like offerings. His voice was always calm, almost bored. But everyone who left that room did so, with their shoulders tighter than when they'd entered. I wondered how many lives fit between his silence and his next command. One afternoon, a delivery arrived. I was sitting in the library when I heard the rumble of engines outside, followed by hurried footsteps. I peeked through the window. A group of men unloading wooden crates from the trunk of a car. Franco supervised, arms crossed. He saw me watching and shook his head slightly, a warning to look away. When I turned back, Giovanni was standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't be near the windows," he said. I wasn't. Curiosity isn't harmless here. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried the kind of authority that didn't need to raise itself. He walked further into the room, scanning the shelves like he'd been here 1,000 times. "How are you feeling?" "Better." I hesitated. "Bored." He looked at me then, a quick, assessing glance. "Boredom is safer than excitement. I'm starting to understand why no one around here breathes too loudly." Quote. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You notice more than most. It's hard not to, when everyone stares like I'm a ghost." He poured himself a drink from the cabinet in the corner. The amber liquid caught the light. "They don't know what to make of you. You shouldn't exist in their world, but here you are. Then send me home." He took a slow sip before answering. "Home isn't safe. You keep saying that, because it's true." I crossed my arms. Maybe safety isn't what I want. That made him pause. He set the glass down, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Then what do you want?" "I want to make my own choices," I said, surprising myself with how steady it came out, even if they're the wrong ones. He studied me for a long time. "In this life," he said finally, "wanting your own choices is the first wrong one." We stared at each other across the space between us, something unspoken tightening the air. He looked away first, walking toward the window. "There are men who think hurting you was a way to hurt me," he said. "They were wrong. But you being here means others will try again. You can hate me for keeping you close, but you'll stay alive that way." "Alive isn't the same as free," I said softly. He turned then, his gaze darker than the storm clouds gathering outside. "Freedom is a luxury for people who don't bleed when someone else makes a decision." Quote. He left the room, his footsteps fading down the hall. Later I found Franco in the courtyard. "Does he ever sleep?" I asked. "Not really," he said. "He says sleep is when men lose control of their empires." I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my throat. "And you? Why do you stay?" Franco looked toward the windows, where Giovanni's shadow moved against the curtain. "Some debts aren't paid with money." That night, as I lay in bed, the thunder returned. The storm rolled over the city, shaking the windows, making the lights flicker. I imagined Giovanni sitting alone in his office, the sound of rain mixing with the hum of quiet anger. Somewhere out there, someone had learned what it meant to send a message to him. For the first time, I understood what kind of world I was living in, a place where loyalty was currency and affection was a weapon disguised as mercy. And as I listened to the rain hammering the glass, I realized something even worse. Part of me no longer wanted to leave. The storm broke sometime before dawn, leaving behind a sky the color of smoke. I didn't sleep. The house breathed around me, its silence no longer frightening but almost familiar. By morning, the corridors had the hushed calm of a cathedral after Mass. I found myself walking toward the library again, drawn by something I couldn't name. The library was enormous, its walls lined with dark shelves and books whose spines had seen more years than I had. Light spilled through tall windows, dust floating like quiet secrets. The air smelled faintly of cedar and whiskey, a scent I now recognized as him. Giovanni was there, of course. He stood by the window, one hand resting on the frame, the other holding a glass half full of amber. He didn't turn when I entered, but he must have known it was me. Somehow he always knew. "You're not supposed to wander alone," he said. "I couldn't sleep," I answered. The rain was too loud. He looked over his shoulder then, the faintest flicker of a smile in his eyes. "The rain can be a comfort if you let it, only if you're not the one standing under it." He set the glass down and gestured to a chair by the fire. "Sit." I hesitated, then obeyed. The chair was soft, warmer than it looked. Giovanni poured another drink, this one into a second glass, and placed it on the small table beside me. I stared at it, then at him. "I don't drink," I said. "It's not about the drink." He sat across from me. "It's about the quiet." I let my fingers trace the edge of the glass. "Quiet doesn't feel safe anymore." "It never was," he said. "You just didn't notice before." We sat there for a moment, the fire crackling softly between us. The room felt suspended in time, like the outside world had stopped breathing to give us a minute to exist. "Do you ever get tired of it?" I asked finally. "Of people fearing you?" His gaze drifted toward the shelves. "Fear keeps things simple, but it keeps you alone." He looked back at me. The intensity in his eyes made the air heavier. "You think I'm alone?" "Aren't you?" Something unreadable crossed his face. He leaned back, studying me as if my words were a puzzle he wanted to understand but didn't dare solve. "There was a time when I thought power meant control," he said. "Then I learned control means losing everything you can't hold in your hand. That sounds lonely. It's necessary." He spoke the word like a man reciting a prayer he no longer believed in. I didn't know why I said it, but the words came out before I could stop them. "You don't scare me as much as you should." Quote. A small sound, half amusement, half disbelief, escaped him. "That's a dangerous thing to admit." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but it's true." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his voice low. "People who aren't afraid of me tend to disappear, one way or another." "Then I'll make sure to stay afraid," I replied. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, a real one this time, brief and almost tender. "You have a sharp mouth for someone who cleans floors." Quote. "I don't clean floors anymore," I said. His eyes softened. "No, you don't." Silence settled again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It was full, alive. The firelight danced across his face, catching in the lines near his eyes. For the first time, he looked human, tired, perhaps even sad. I said, "You didn't have to protect me." He shook his head. "I didn't protect you for you." "Then for what?" "For what it said about me if I didn't." Quote. I stared at him, trying to understand. He reached out then, slowly, and brushed a stray thread from my sleeve. The gesture was almost absent-minded, but it sent a shiver up my arm. "There's a kind of peace in being seen," he said softly. "But it comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" I wanted to ask what that price was, but my throat refused to cooperate. I could only nod. "Good," he murmured, "because I don't intend to lose you now." Quote. He stood, gathering his composure as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. "Breakfast is at 8. Franco will escort you." I watched him go, the echo of his words still clinging to the air like smoke. When the door closed, I looked down at the untouched glass beside me. The surface of the liquid trembled slightly, catching the reflection of the fire. I lifted it, held it to the light, and thought about the question he hadn't asked, the one I didn't have the courage to answer. Did I want to be seen by him? The glass was warm against my palm. I set it back down, untouched. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, but the clouds still lingered. And somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder if I had already started to belong to the storm. The days that followed blurred together, soft and slow, like smoke curling from a match that refused to die. Outside, the city thawed into a weak spring, but inside the Moretti estate, time behaved differently. It didn't move forward, it circled, quiet and deliberate, the way he did when he spoke my name. Giovanni had stopped pretending I was invisible. It began with small things. A cup of coffee that appeared every morning on the table outside my room, dark, no sugar, just the way I drank it. I never told anyone how I liked it. A coat folded neatly over the back of the chair near the door, exactly my size, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. A book left on my nightstand, one I'd mentioned once in passing. None of these gestures were acknowledged, but they arrived with a precision too intentional to be coincidence. He was watching, not in the way predators watch prey, but the way soldiers track the line between loyalty and weakness. The staff watched too. I felt it in the way their conversations dropped when I entered the room, in the careful way they addressed me Miss Lauren now, never the girl. Their eyes carried curiosity mixed with unease, like they were waiting to see what kind of ruin I would bring with me. Franco stayed near, a quiet shadow. He drove me to doctor's appointments, to the market, sometimes nowhere at all, circling the city just to fill time, until Giovanni said it was safe for me to breathe in public again. One morning, while Franco filled the car with gas, I asked, "Does he always do this? Protect people who don't belong to him?" He didn't look up from the fuel gauge. "You think you don't belong to him? I'm not part of his world. You are now." The words landed like stones dropped into deep water. That afternoon, when we returned, Giovanni was in the garden. He stood by the fountain, jacket off, sleeves rolled high, sunlight cutting gold across the lines of his face. He looked different, less untouchable, more real. When he saw me, his expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Walk with me," he said. I hesitated. I thought I wasn't allowed outside alone. "You're not." He glanced toward Franco. "You're not alone." We walked along the path, gravel crunching underfoot, the scent of rain still clinging to the roses. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, thick with all the words neither of us trusted enough to speak. After a while, he said, "You're healing faster than expected." "I'm trying." He nodded, then looked down at the ring on his finger, turning it slowly. "You've changed the rhythm of this house." "He didn't mean to." "That's what makes it dangerous." I frowned. "Dangerous for who?" He looked at me then, and for the first time, there was no armor in his eyes, only weariness. "For me," he said. Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from the city below, and for a heartbeat, we were just two people standing in sunlight that didn't belong to either of us. That night, I found another cup of coffee waiting outside my door. It had gone cold, but I held it anyway, palms wrapped around the porcelain, pretending the warmth was still there. Sleep didn't come easily. I dreamed of the alley again, the sound of rain, the taste of fear, but this time, when I turned, it wasn't the two men waiting in the dark. It was Giovanni, standing where they had stood, saying nothing, his eyes unreadable. When I woke, the window was open, the curtains swaying like breath. Someone had left a folded note on the table. One line, written in clean, deliberate script: "Stay inside tomorrow. There's business in the city." No signature. It didn't need one. By mid-morning, the estate was busier than usual. Cars came and went, men with earpieces murmuring into radios. Franco's voice echoed down the hall, issuing orders in a tone that was almost gentle but never uncertain. Giovanni was nowhere to be seen. I waited by the window, watching the garden darken under clouds. Hours passed, the rain returned. When the last car disappeared through the gates, the house went silent again, as if holding its breath. It was near midnight when I heard the engine return. I didn't move, just listened. Doors opened, footsteps crossed the marble floor, and then voices, low and sharp. Something about balance, something about payment. And then Giovanni's voice, calm but colder than I'd ever heard it. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The tone was enough to know someone would not be seen again. When the house finally went quiet, I found myself in the corridor, drawn toward the sound that wasn't there anymore. His office door was open a crack. I saw him sitting behind the desk, jacket off, tie loosened, his hands clasped, head bowed. For once, he didn't look like a man who owned the night. He looked like someone the night had claimed a long time ago. He must have felt me watching because he spoke without looking up. "You shouldn't be here." I couldn't sleep. He lifted his head. "Neither can I." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he said softly, "Go back to bed, Lauren." I hesitated in the doorway. "Did you find them? The men from before?" "Yes." "What happened to them?" He looked at me then, and his voice was quiet but absolute. "They won't hurt anyone again." I nodded. He didn't need to say more. I went back to my room, closed the door, and leaned against it, trying to steady my breath. The house was still. The rain outside was a whisper now, softer, almost kind. Somewhere, in the quiet between storms, I realized what frightened me most wasn't the violence, it was how safe I felt inside it. The night of the dinner began with silence, the kind that comes before a storm people pretend not to notice. The house was polished brighter than usual. Every surface gleamed. Every corner smelled faintly of wine and oil and nerves. I was asked no, instructed to help prepare the table. No one explained why. No one needed to. When Giovanni requested something, the house moved. Franco appeared at my door at 7. "You'll assist in serving," he said. "I don't usually..." "Don't judo." He didn't wait for me to answer. Downstairs, the dining room had been transformed. The long mahogany table shone like still water, lined with silver that caught the chandelier's light and scattered it in sharp little fragments. 12 seats, 2 at the center more important than all the others. The air was heavy with something I couldn't name, anticipation maybe, or the quiet hum of danger wrapped in perfume and linen. Giovanni entered a few minutes later, dressed in black. Not the tailored elegance he wore in daylight, this was something colder. Authority disguised as calm. His tie was perfect. His expression was unreadable. Mr. Krasnicki will be joining us shortly, he said to no one in particular. Then his eyes found mine. You'll pour the wine, stay behind me, don't speak. Quote. My pulse stumbled. Yes, sir. He studied me for half a heartbeat too long, as if deciding whether to change his mind. Then he nodded once, satisfied. When the guests arrived, the sound of their laughter filled the hall like broken glass. The men who entered wore smiles sharp enough to cut. At their center was Victor Krasnicki, tall, pale, with a scar running from his temple to the corner of his jaw. His suit was immaculate, his watch gold enough to blind. He greeted Giovanni with an embrace that was not an embrace, their shoulders touching without warmth. Giovanni, Victor said, it's been too long. Not long enough, Giovanni replied. They sat. The others followed. I stood by the wall, hands clasped behind my back, trying not to breathe too loudly. Conversation began in a language I didn't know, half English, half something older, heavier. Words passed like blades being tested for balance. I poured wine when Franco nodded, my hands steady only because I forced them to be. At one point, Victor glanced at me and smiled, a slow, deliberate thing. New staff? He asked. Giovanni didn't look at me. She's efficient. She's brave, Victor said, eyes still on me. To work here these days. Bravery, Giovanni said, isn't always a choice. The table laughed, but it wasn't funny. I felt the air shift, colder now. Victor raised his glass. A toast, then, to new alliances. Quote. Giovanni lifted his own glass but didn't drink. I don't make alliances with people who mistake messages for mercy. The laughter died. Victor's smile faltered just slightly. You misunderstand. What happened in that alley unfortunate, yes, but not personal. It became personal, Giovanni said, his tone low and controlled. The moment my employee bled in my city. My hands froze around the wine bottle. Every man at the table went still. The chandelier buzzed faintly overhead. Victor chuckled, though the sound didn't reach his eyes. I can compensate you, if that's what you want. Giovanni's gaze hardened. Do I look like a man who takes payment for insult? No, Victor said softly. You look like a man who takes revenge. Giovanni smiled barely. Then you do understand. They held each other's stare long enough for everyone in the room to start breathing shallow. I poured another glass, my hand shaking so slightly only I noticed. When I stepped back, Giovanni's hand brushed mine not by accident. A small, grounding touch. Stay calm. Dinner continued, but the air never recovered. Conversation turned to trade, property, meaningless chatter meant to disguise the fact that two empires were testing each other's borders. I stood behind Giovanni's chair, listening to every word, every shift in tone. He never raised his voice, never blinked too long, but the tension was a living thing coiled and ready. Dessert came and went. The men rose. Giovanni walked Victor to the door. I followed a few paces behind. At the threshold, Victor turned, his voice honeyed and cold. We'll see each other again soon. Giovanni's reply was almost a whisper. Only if you survive tonight. Victor's smile froze, then vanished. Without another word, he stepped into the rain, his entourage following like shadows. The doors closed. The house exhaled. Giovanni stood there for a moment, his hand still on the door handle. The light caught the side of his face, stone, carved and unyielding. They won't try that again, he said quietly. Was that a threat? I asked before I could stop myself. He turned toward me, eyes dark. It was a promise. Franco appeared from the shadows, murmured something in Italian. Giovanni nodded, dismissed him with a gesture. Then his attention returned to me. You shouldn't have been here, he said. You told me to be. His jaw tightened. I wanted you to see what this world costs. Maybe you'll stop wishing for freedom. I didn't wish for this, I said. No, he said softly, almost kindly. But it wished for you. He left me standing there, alone in the echo of his words. I looked at the table, the scattered glasses, the crumbs of bread, the stains of wine, and thought about how power never left a room clean. That night, as thunder rolled over the city, I lay awake in my room replaying the way he'd said it. It wished for you. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which frightened me more, his world, or the part of me that was starting to understand it. The rain came back that night, heavier than before, thick, relentless, the kind that drowns the city until every sound feels half submerged. I sat by the window, tracing shapes on the glass with my finger, watching the drops slide down like slow tears. My hands still smelled faintly of wine from the dinner. My heart still carried the echo of Giovanni's voice saying, "It wished for you." I didn't expect him to come. After nights like that, Men like him usually preferred solitude, the kind that looked like control but was really exhaustion. Yet, sometime after midnight, when the storm hit its loudest, there was a knock. Tre short, even raps. No hesitation. I didn't answer right away. My reflection in the window looked pale, uncertain. When I finally said, "Come in," my voice barely reached the door. He stepped inside without waiting. No jacket, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows again, a thin line of rain still glistening in his hair. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, silent, watching me. "You shouldn't be awake," he said. "Neither should you." He smiled faintly. "Touché." Quote. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the drum of rain against the windows. I could smell smoke on him, faint and familiar. He walked toward the table, picked up the half-empty cup of coffee I hadn't finished hours ago, and turned it in his hand as though reading something in its residue. "I keep wondering," he said, "what you think of me." The question startled me more than his presence. "Why would you care what I think?" He looked up then, his eyes catching the dim light. "Because I've given you every reason to be afraid, and yet you're not." "I am," I said softly, "just not in the way you think." He tilted his head. "Explain." "I'm not afraid of what you'll do to me," I said, choosing each word carefully. "I'm afraid of what you'll make me become." He didn't answer right away. The fire from the hallway flickered faintly through the open door, washing gold over his face. "That's a fair fear," he said finally. "You should keep it. It might save you." "Gwen." "I don't want to be saved," I whispered. Something in his expression shifted, like a wall cracking just enough for light to slip through. He took a step closer. "Then what do you want?" I didn't know. Or maybe I did, and was too ashamed to admit it. The rain filled the silence for me. He came closer still, close enough for me to see the faint bruise near his collarbone, a reminder of whatever war he'd fought tonight. "You saw what I am," he said. "At that table. You saw what I have to be." Quote. "I saw a man pretending he doesn't feel." His eyes darkened. "Pretending works better than feeling." "Not tonight," I said. He exhaled, slow, almost a sigh. "You think I wanted you to see that side of me? I think you wanted me to understand why you're the way you are." He nodded once. "And did you?" I hesitated. "I'm starting to." He reached out then, hesitant, careful. His fingers brushed the side of my face, tracing the faint line where a bruise had once been. "When I saw that," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't think, I just acted, and that scared me." "Why?" "Because control is all I have left." The confession hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I could feel the warmth of his hand, the weight of everything unsaid. "I should go," he murmured, but he didn't move. "Then go," I said, though my voice didn't mean it. He searched my eyes like a man standing on the edge of a choice he'd promised never to make. The moment stretched, thin as glass. Then he leaned forward and kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that steals the air out of a room, born from too much silence, too much restraint. His hand slid to the back of my neck, anchoring me. Not to possess, but to keep me from shaking. My heart pounded against him like it was trying to break through. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. Both of us were breathing too hard. "That was a mistake," he said quietly. "Probably," I whispered. "But I don't regret it." "Neither do I." The corner of his mouth twitched, something between a smile and a sigh. "You shouldn't say things like that to men like me. Then stop being the kind of man who makes me want to." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if memorizing my voice. Then he stepped back, all composure again, his guard slamming back into place. "I need you to understand something," he said. "Everything that touches me breaks. Don't try to be the exception. Maybe I already am." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then he turned, hand on the door. "Good night, Lauren." "Good night," I whispered. But he didn't hear it. Or maybe he did and chose not to. When the door closed, I pressed my fingers to my lips. They still burned where he'd touched me. Outside, the rain softened, almost tender now, as if the city itself had paused to listen. Sleep didn't come. Only the memory of his voice, and the impossible warmth of that kiss that had felt less like a beginning and more like a warning. And yet, for the first time since I met him, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The morning after the kiss, the house felt different. It wasn't louder, not exactly just heavier, as if the air itself knew something forbidden had happened within its walls. I woke with the taste of him still lingering on my lips, and the uneasy truth that I couldn't take it back. When I stepped into the corridor, 2 new guards stood outside my door. They didn't speak, didn't look at me. They just existed there, solid and still, like warnings carved from flesh. At breakfast, the staff avoided my eyes. Even Franco wouldn't meet my gaze. Only Giovanni seemed unchanged. He sat at the far end of the long dining table, immaculate as ever, reading the morning paper as if nothing at all had shifted between us. But everything had. "Good morning," I said carefully. He didn't look up. "You should eat." "I'm not hungry." "Then pretend," he said, turning a page. "Pretending keeps you alive." I stared at him. The man from last night, the one who had kissed me, who had let his mask slip, was gone. This version was polished steel again, cold and remote. When I finally spoke, my voice shook despite me. "Why are there guards outside my door?" "For your safety." "Safety from what?" "From the world," he said, still not looking at me. "And from yourself." Quote. I stood. "I'm not your prisoner." He folded the paper neatly, set it aside, and finally met my eyes. "No, you're under my protection. Don't confuse the two. It feels the same." "It isn't." His calmness only made me angrier. "You think you can decide where I go, who I see, what I do? I already have. You can't keep me here forever." He leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile touching his lips. "I don't need forever. I just need long enough for you to forget what freedom costs." Quote. The words struck harder than a shout. I felt my throat tighten, tears threatening but unwanted. "You can't control me like one of your men." He rose slowly, unhurried, the way a storm gathers. "I don't want to control you, Lauren. I want to keep you breathing. I was breathing just fine before you." He stepped closer, eyes dark and steady. "Were you?" The quiet between us was unbearable. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to hit him. I wanted him to kiss me again just so I could slap him for it. But all I could do was stand there, trembling, furious, and terrified by how much his voice still calmed me even when it shouldn't. Finally I said, "You can't lock me away because you're afraid of losing control." His answer came low and sharp. "I can do anything I must." That was the end of it. I turned and walked out, my heart hammering so loud I barely heard him call my name. The guards stepped aside but didn't move to stop me. The sky outside was the color of metal. I pushed through the doors and into the garden, the cold air biting my skin. For a moment, I thought I could just keep walking to the gate, to the city, to anywhere that wasn't his world. But the gates were closed, heavy iron wrapped in cameras, and men with unreadable faces. Freedom was right there, gleaming behind steel. Franco found me standing at the fence. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "I needed air. Air's expensive around here." I turned on him. "Does he know what this looks like? Keeping me trapped like an animal?" Franco sighed. "He knows. He just doesn't care what it looks like. He cares what happens if you vanish. I'm not going anywhere." "That's what he's afraid of," Franco said quietly. The words made no sense until later that night. When I returned to my room, the guards were gone, but a phone sat on the nightstand. A single message glowed on the screen. "Don't leave again without me." I stared at it for a long time before throwing the phone against the wall. It shattered, the sound sharp and final. I didn't sleep. I waited, half hoping he'd come, half praying he wouldn't. He didn't. By midnight, I couldn't bear the silence. I grabbed my coat and slipped down the back staircase. The house felt deserted, the halls dimly lit, the echo of my footsteps following like guilt. I crossed the courtyard, my breath forming small clouds in the cold. Beyond the gate, the road shimmered with recent rain, stretching into the city lights below. Freedom was close enough to taste. "Lauren." His voice stopped me cold. He stood behind me, shadowed by the glow of the porch light, rain catching in his hair. He wasn't angry. That would have been easier. He looked tired. "I told you not to run," he said. "I'm not running," I whispered. "I'm leaving." "There's no difference." "Wait." "There is to me." He stepped forward until we were only a few feet apart. "You think the world out there has forgotten your face? The men who hurt you? They'd kill you just to remind me they can. I can't live behind your walls forever." "Then you'll die outside them." The words landed like thunder between us. I shook my head. "You don't own me." He took another step, voice low but breaking around the edges. "You're right, but I can't lose you either." "Gwent." The honesty in his tone was worse than his anger. It sounded like defeat. "Giovanni," I said, my voice barely holding. "You're turning protection into prison." He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly. "Maybe that's all I know how to build." The wind carried the scent of rain and smoke. Neither of us spoke again. Finally, he turned away, shoulders stiff. "Go, if you want. I won't stop you tonight." But he didn't move until I did. I walked past him, my footsteps loud on the wet stones. I didn't look back, though I could feel his gaze on my back until I disappeared into the dark. The city waited below, full of light and danger, both of them pulling me in equal measure. For the first time in months, I was free. And for the first time in my life, it felt exactly like falling. Dawn came quietly, like the world was too tired to make an entrance. The city below still glittered with last night's rain, streets washed clean but never innocent. I hadn't gone far, only as far as the bus stop at the end of the hill, where the cold crept under my coat and the wind bit through my thoughts. I'd spent the night there, watching headlights come and go, none of them mine. By the time I returned, the sky was bruised pink and gray. The gates of the Moretti estate stood open, as if they'd been waiting for me. Franco was by the car, arms folded, his breath visible in the chill. "You made it longer than most," he said. "Is he angry?" Franco gave a small shrug. "Anger would be simpler. He's waiting on the roof." I followed the path without another word. The mansion was silent, its windows reflecting the weak sunrise. Every step felt heavier the closer I got. When I reached the door to the rooftop terrace, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. He was already there. Giovanni stood near the edge, coat unbuttoned, hair tousled by the wind. The dawn light painted his face in soft gold, turning the man everyone feared into someone almost human. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the ledge beside him. "You're early," he said without turning around. "He didn't sleep." Neither did I. I stepped closer, the cold stone rough beneath my shoes. "Why are you up here?" He glanced toward the horizon. "It's the only place I can see the whole city and still pretend I don't own it." Quote. I joined him at the railing, close enough to feel the warmth from his coat. Below us, the city hummed small cars, slow morning, 1,000 people starting over while we stood frozen in the same night. "I shouldn't have left," I said quietly. "No," he said. "You should have. Everyone leaves me eventually. I'm just used to it happening later." The honesty in his tone surprised me. "Is that what this is, then? You keeping me here because you're afraid I'll leave?" He didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened around the glass. "I keep things close so I can control them," he said finally. "But I can't seem to control you." "I don't want control," I said. "I just want to choose what kind of cage I live in." He turned to face me fully now, and for once there was no command in his eyes, only a quiet kind of pleading. "You think I wanted this life? I think it's the only one that listened when you spoke." That made him smile, small, broken, real. "You see too much. Maybe you wanted someone to." He studied me, his gaze searching for something he couldn't name. The wind tugged at his coat, lifting its edges. Somewhere below, a church bell rang, thin and far away. "I don't know how to love without trying to protect," he said. "And I don't know how to be protected without feeling trapped." Quote. He nodded slowly. Then we're both cursed. I took a step closer until we were standing side by side, facing the dawn. "Maybe it's not a curse," I said. "Maybe it's just the price of surviving the wrong way for too long." He laughed softly, the sound low and rough, like it had forgotten how to be laughter. "You always have an answer. Only because you never stop asking questions you already know." He looked down at me then, eyes darker than the sky, voice steady but low. "I meant what I said before. Everything that touches me breaks. Then let me be the exception." He shook his head. "You don't know what that costs." "I'm willing to find out." Silence again, the kind that holds its breath before something inevitable. He reached for me slowly, as if afraid the world might notice. His hand brushed my cheek, his thumb tracing a line down to my chin. I didn't move. The air between us was charged, electric, alive. "Lauren," he whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "Then tell me to leave." He didn't. The moment stretched thin, trembling. Then he leaned in, and the space between us dissolved. The kiss was softer this time, stripped of the desperation that had marked the first. It felt like surrender not to passion, but to truth. When it ended, we stayed close, his forehead resting against mine. The city was waking beneath us, unaware that something fragile had been born atop its rooftops. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "You already are." He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly. "I can't promise it will be safe." "I don't need safe," I said. "I just need real." The sun finally broke over the skyline, scattering gold across the glass towers below. Giovanni looked at it for a long time, then at me. "Then stay, but not because I told you to." I smiled, small but sure. "Then I'm staying because I want to." He nodded once, the faintest sign of peace on his face. Together, we stood there, the wind cold, the light warm, the city below moving like a living thing we didn't have to control anymore. Maybe love wasn't the opposite of danger. Maybe it was just learning to breathe beside it. "Maybe peace," I said softly, is just the space between two breaths. He turned toward me, the morning sun catching in his eyes. Then don't stop breathing. And for the first time since the night in that alley, I didn't. Time has a strange way of softening sharp edges. Weeks became months, and the bruises that once colored my skin faded to faint memories. The house that had once felt like a cage began to breathe with me. The guards still stood at their posts. The walls still whispered secrets, but something inside the rhythm of the estate had changed. I changed it. Giovanni no longer called me the girl. He called me by my name. He didn't say it often, but when he did, it carried a weight that made my heart ache in quiet ways. My days filled with new patterns. I managed his calls, organized meetings, drafted letters that never used his real words but always carried his intent. When he spoke, I listened. When I spoke, he did too. There was balance now, uneasy, fragile, but real. At first, the staff didn't know what to do with me. They watched from the corners of rooms, cautious but curious. Then, slowly, they began to nod in greeting. The same men who once avoided my gaze now held doors open. The house no longer swallowed me whole. It made space. One morning, as I walked through the garden, Franco fell into step beside me. "He's different," he said. "So am I." He smiled slightly. "He sleeps more now. That's a good thing, isn't it?" For him, it's a miracle. Giovanni had indeed softened, though never in front of anyone but me. In public, he remained the man the city feared. Precise, untouchable, the shadow behind every rumor. But in private, I caught glimpses of something quieter. A man who would pause at the sound of my laughter. A man who didn't need to win every battle anymore. One evening, he stood by the window in his study, the last light of sunset painting the city in gold. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but then I remember what it felt like to be invisible." Quote. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I'm seen." He nodded once, almost solemnly. "That's all I ever wanted, for you to be seen, even if it wasn't by me. But it was him. It had always been him." The empire he ruled began to change too. There were fewer midnight calls, fewer bodies that vanished into the river. Deals were made differently now, slower, quieter, more deliberate. When Franco mentioned expanding into Queens, Giovanni shook his head. "Peace," he said simply. "For once, let's see what that looks like." Peace, I discovered, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or fireworks. It seeps in quietly, like dawn through half-closed curtains. I often watched him in those still hours before morning, the way he leaned against the balcony railing, the cigarette glowing faintly in the dark. There was something fragile about the way the smoke drifted upward, like even the air refused to hold it too tightly. One night I joined him there. The city below shimmered like a restless heartbeat. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Any of it?" He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Regret is a luxury. I prefer memory." "Then remember this," I said. He glanced at me. "What?" "That you're not alone anymore." He looked away, but his hand found mine. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. When I finally went to bed, I left the balcony door open. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and rain, the same smell that had followed me from that alley to this life. In the morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was still. I walked through its halls, the same ones I'd once cleaned in silence, and found that I no longer felt small inside them. I belonged here now, not because I was trapped, but because I had chosen to stay. In the grand hallway, a mirror caught my reflection. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Steady gaze, unflinching posture, a softness that didn't look like weakness anymore. I smiled at her. Outside, Giovanni's car waited by the fountain, engine running. He was leaving for another meeting, another day of pretending to rule a world he no longer needed to dominate. He looked up as I stepped into the doorway. "You'll be here when I get back?" he asked. "Always." He smiled, faint but genuine. "Then that's enough." Quote. When the car disappeared down the drive, I stood beneath the marble archway, the morning light wrapping around me like a quiet promise. Somewhere far off, the city moved, alive and indifferent, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I took a breath. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of wet roses and distant smoke. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to hide. Now I am seen.